I was just wondering what you meant, like, well, what it meant by exactly when it says to honor your parents. Like, exactly what does that mean? Like, how do you see that?
One thing it means is, okay, one thing it means is to respect them. You may not always agree, and you know, and that's why it says it that way. It doesn't say to obey, you know, but it means to respect them, if that make any sense. That you can, in other words, if you have a difference of opinion, you can just agree to disagree, you know, and to honor them. One thing I point out to my wife sometimes, like whenever we watch, there have been times in the past where we've watched a movie that with the Middle Eastern people, you know, like the Japanese people and Chinese people, and you see how they are, how they, no matter how old they are, it's almost like they still have a childlike nature when they're with their, that's what it means when it says to honor, because you have to keep in mind that these, what we're reading here, it actually comes from that culture, and this is kind of lined up together there. So it means to just to respect them, you know, that you don't dishonor them, in other words, that you don't do anything. And not only that, but it talks about there have been times like after I have gotten grown, and even to this day I still think about the decisions that I've made. And I think about, you know, of course my father, he's deceased now, but sometimes I wonder what would he have thought about me making this decision. Because see, when we make bad decisions as adults, it casts a bad shadow on our parents. You know, and I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. You're grown, you know, and I don't know if you understand what I mean, but like, say for instance, you do something, maybe an adult, like you watch the news and you see how people steal, you see how they kill, they go to jail for whatever reason. And that person that's doing all of that is not honoring their parents. You see what I mean? So it's not like I got to be in your presence and I got to avoid fighting with you or going back and forth with you to dishonor you. I can do something that I was not taught to do.
It's kind of like if you're in the store and somebody, they might bump into you and they don't say excuse me or something, and you're like, how are you raised like that?
Yeah, something like that. So you dishonor yeah, that's a way to dishonor your parents. You're going against what they've taught you, and you're casting a bad light on them. You see, and there was a time when children were concerned about that, even, you know, where people were concerned about how it would make their parents look, you know, and things like that. But of course, we're living in this self-centered society now where nobody's thinking about things like that. You know, there aren't too many people that are, and so we're to do things that way. That we're to honor our parents, you know, in respecting them, doing what we were taught, you know, by them, keeping the good habits that they've taught us. We honor them that way. So it's not just talking about our interaction with them, but also how we are in society. Because no matter how grown we get, you know, after we go to work, if we have an attitude with our boss, it's going to show where we were and how we were raised, and it's a reflection on not only us, but who, you know, who our parents are. So we honor them in that manner. And a good example is with Adam. Of course, his father was God, but he didn't honor God when he ate of that tree, you know, and that was, God told him not to do it, and he did it anyway. I'll give you one more example. Everybody know Moses, the writer of these first 5 books of the Bible. When he came out of the promise, when they came out of Egypt, he was supposed to bring them into the promised land. Does anybody know why he didn't bring them in? Why God told him you weren't going to be able to bring them in? He wasn't going to be able to bring them in. He couldn't bring them in because God said, you didn't sanctify me before the people. For 40 years, Moses dealt with some stiff-necked, hard-headed people. These people were complaining and murmuring, and I think they eventually just got under Moses' skin. And so one day they were complaining about not having water to drink. Now God had destroyed thousands of them already in the wilderness. And Moses the whole time is really the only faithful person that God has in all of the camp of Israel. And so the Bible says that God said that Moses was the meekest man in Israel. In other words, he was the one, if anybody was going to obey God, he was. He was the meekest man in all of Israel. But then the day came when they complained and murmured, wanting water. We're tired of being thirsty out here. We want some water. And so Moses went to God and said, God, these people want water. God told Moses to go and speak to the rock that was following them in the wilderness. Speak to the rock so that it'll bring forth water. Moses, in his anger, took his rod and smote the rock twice. And he spoke to the people, said, come, must we fetch you water, ye rebels? That water came out of there because God honored his office. But then God called him to the side and said, okay, Moses, because you didn't sanctify me before the people, you're not going to enter into the promised land. In other words, he dishonored God. What was the problem? Because God's thought was this: how am I going to get through to these people that they need to honor me when I've set you up as a leader and you're dishonoring me? And so we have to think about that as children when we get grown and we grow up. Our parents pass a torch on to us for us to continue to live in the ways of God. But sometimes we allow the enemy to get in there, and it causes us not only to dishonor our parents, but to dishonor God through dishonoring our parents, you see. And so Moses was disobedient. He smoked the rock twice instead of speaking to it like God told him to. And because of that, 40 years was going down the drain. In other words, all that 40 years, all that time he had put up with those people, he missed it that one time, and it cost him going into the promised land and spending any time there, you see. And so that's what it means when it talks about us honoring our parents. Not just our interaction with them, but as well with how we interact with others is a reflection on our parents. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question? All right.